All right, today we're cracking open a case that, let's be honest, affects every single one of us. The mystery of the vanishing memory. We're going to play detective and figure out why our brain's filing cabinet seems to have a mind of its own. Let's dive in.
You know the feeling, right? You walk into a room with a clear purpose, and then, poof, it's just gone. Or you're trying to remember someone's name, and it's right there on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't grab it. It really feels like our brain has a delete button it loves to press. But is that what's actually going on?
So what are we officially talking about here? Psychologically, forgetting isn't just about information going up in smoke. Notice the wording here. It's the apparent loss, or the inaccessibility of information. That little distinction is our first major clue. Sometimes the file isn't deleted at all. It's just misplaced. So let's head to our first crime scene.
Our first stop is short-term memory. This is where information hangs out for a super brief time. And in here, the evidence fades, and it fades fast, thanks to two main culprits.
Meet our two prime suspects in short-term memory loss. First up, you've got trace decay. The best way to think about this is like a leaky bucket. If you don't keep rehearsing a memory, repeating it to yourself, the physical trace of it in your brain just fades away. Then there's displacement. Picture a crowded conveyor belt at the grocery store. Your short-term memory has a very limited amount of space, so when new stuff comes in, the older items just get knocked right off.
And that leaky bucket? It empties out incredibly fast. A classic study by Peterson and Peterson found that if you're not actively rehearsing information, like repeating a phone number over and over, it's gone in as little as 18 to 30 seconds. That's it, gone.
And that conveyor belt for displacement? It is shockingly small. Turns out, most of us can only hold about 7 things in our short-term memory at any one time, give or take a couple. So that 9th item you're trying to add to your mental shopping list? Yeah, it probably just pushed something else off the belt. So in short-term memory, it all boils down to a ticking clock and a tiny workspace.
Okay, now let's move on to long-term memory. This is our cold case unit. The files in here aren't necessarily gone. They're just buried. The problem isn't decay. It's more like a massive information traffic jam.
The prime suspect in long-term forgetting is something called interference theory. This is basically what happens when 2 or more memories get their wires crossed. They start competing with each other, they conflict, and they end up blocking your access. And this happens in 2 very distinct ways.
First, we have proactive interference. Think of pro as forward. An old memory moves forward in time to block a new one. This is exactly why you might keep writing your old postcode on a form even though you moved months ago. That old, really well-learned memory is acting like a bully, making it tough to recall the new one.
And the opposite of that is retroactive interference. Think retro as in backward. New learning works backward to mess up an old memory. A perfect example is learning a new language. You spend a year getting really good at French, and then suddenly you find it's almost impossible to remember the Spanish you learned in college. The new information has basically overwritten the old file.
So what's the common thread here? Well, a key piece of evidence comes from a study way back in 1931. Researchers McGeach and McDonald figured out that this whole interference thing is way stronger when the memories are similar. That's why learning French after Spanish gets your wires so crossed, but learning to play the guitar after learning about astrophysics probably won't cause any problem.
But hold on. What if the memory isn't faded or blocked? What if it's perfectly filed away, but you've just lost the key to the cabinet? This brings us to our next culprit. Retrieval failure.
Psychologists call this cue-dependent forgetting. And the big idea here is that the memory file is perfectly safe in your long-term storage. The problem is you can't access it because you're missing the special key, the retrieval cue, that was there when you first saved it.
And these little retrieval keys come in 2 main types. You've got context cues, which are all about your external environment, where you were, the sounds, the smells. And then you have state cues, which are all internal, your mood or whether you were tired or wide awake. If you try to unlock a memory without the right key, you'll find it's just completely stuck.
And the evidence for this is just fascinating. In a famous study, researchers had deep-sea divers learn a list of words, either underwater or on the beach. And they found that recall was dramatically better when the place they learned matched the place they were tested. The divers who learned underwater remembered way more when they were tested, you guessed it, underwater. The context was the key.
The exact same thing is true for our internal state. In another cool study, participants were given antihistamines to make them drowsy. And the researchers found that if you learned a list of words while you were drowsy, you were much better at remembering them if you were also drowsy during the test. It's wild. Matching your internal state can literally be the key to unlocking a memory. And now for the final and maybe the most profound twist in our whole investigation. What if memory isn't a perfect recording at all? What if your brain is less like a video camera and more like an unreliable witness, constantly editing the story?
This whole theory centers on the idea of schemas. A schema is basically a mental framework or a little packet of knowledge that you've built up from all your past experiences. You have a schema for a birthday party, a library, or a dog. And when you form a new memory, your brain uses these existing schemas to make sense of it. And, this is the important part, to fill in any gaps.
The pioneer of this whole theory, a psychologist named Frederick Bartlett, absolutely nailed it with this quote. He argued that memory is an active effort after meaning. What he meant is that we aren't just passively recording our experiences. No, our minds are constantly working to shape them into a story that makes sense to us.
Bartlett's famous War of the Ghosts study is the perfect proof of this. He had British participants read a Native American folktale that was really unfamiliar to them, and then recall it later. The results were astounding. People's schemas just completely took over. They changed canoes to boats. They rationalized strange parts of the story, and they just plain left out details that didn't fit their understanding of the world. Their memories weren't recordings, they were complete reconstructions.
So, there we have it. The case file on forgetting is way more complex than we thought. The culprits aren't just one thing, but a whole lineup. We've got the rapid decay and displacement in short-term memory, the traffic jam of interference in long-term memory, the lost keys of retrieval failure, and finally, our own creative minds, just trying to tell a better, more coherent story.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty mind-bending thought. If memory isn't a perfect recording of the past, but a story we are constantly rewriting, how much of your own life story, your most cherished memories, is pure fact? And how much is a convenient fiction reconstructed to make sense of it all? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining me.